Katie. How are you?
Hi, Nick. Great. How are you?
Good. Thanks for coming in.
Oh, sure.
I know that the last time we talked, we had a little professional development meeting where we talked about our family literacy and how we were going to start by doing a survey. And one of the questions that came up was that parents might be wondering about progress monitoring or wanted a little bit further explained to them. And you had some specific questions about that, you know, as we're approaching our open house, you know, in the first couple weeks of school. So I just want to talk a little bit more about it. You know, being in the district for a few years, I'm a little more familiar with the MAP test. I know last year was your first year, so we use the assessment for a lot of different purposes, and I'm sure you're familiar with some of them, but some we just use to progress monitor, maybe to determine student placement for an upcoming year. We also use it for summer school or Saturday placement. But a lot of the reason we use it is to drive our instruction in our classrooms. You know, we see some of the strengths and maybe some areas of support our students could use. So for you to be able to explain MAP and progress monitoring to the parents, you know, I figured that it'd be a good time for, you know, us to kind of further break it down for you so you could have a better understanding of it. So, you know, we're going to answer some of your questions. So MAP stands for Measures of Academic Progress. And I know that we all received the binder here, and we received so many binders in this district. Sometimes hard, but this is the NWA who sponsors the MAP testing, their binder. So a lot of it's in there. It's not completely user-friendly, but it just means measuring academic progress. You know that we've given it 3 times a year. You were here last year. So really, the ELA department in reading and math is who gives the MAP test. So for our specific categories, there's word knowledge, informational text structure and comprehension, and also literary text structure and comprehension. So the first things to understand are what the results mean and some of those assessment terms that a parent might not be privy to. So, for example, a score range. What's one of the scores one of your students in reading had last year?
212.
Okay. So according to MAP, for a child to be grade level at 7th grade, we're looking in the fall for them to fall in between 215 and 217. By the spring, they should score 220 to 222. Also, in addition to that score, we get a percentile. And that's an important thing because a parent may think like, oh, what does this mean my child's in the 50th percentile? Well, it doesn't mean obviously they got only 50% correct. What it means is they scored, being at 50%, better than half the students who've taken this MAP test nationwide. But also in the middle, 49% have scored better than the child maybe we're talking about. So percentile is something you may need to explain to a parent, as well as the numbered scores. So another question that a parent might have, I mean, do you think, are there any questions that you might anticipate or maybe that you got last year from any parents regarding MAP tests?
I think parents wanted to know why their children were taking these tests.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as a district we were able to answer those questions, that we use it to inform our instruction.
Yeah, and that's basically it. You know, a lot of the times, I mean, this is just a way, it's not an all, you know, end all, but it is a snapshot at a certain point of the school year, and that's a great way to explain it to the parents because it gives us an opportunity to see, you know, where our child's. But in the binder for MAP, you'll also notice that we have a lot of different tools that we can use for the assessment, that we could use, say, for flexible grouping purposes, because when you break down your whole class, you could see some of the strengths in a bigger picture. So that's kind of, we're not only looking at the individual student, but we're also looking at the whole group, which could help us if we're doing guided reading or any kind of centers in our classrooms. So it's important that you explain that benefit from your perspective as well, because, you know, so the parent understands that it's providing that visual of the whole class performance for you on top of just the individual student. So other than creating flexible groups, I mean, I know you've been a big part of the differentiation. It helps us with differentiating instruction, specific skills or strategies we might be using. I know that NWA, the company, I noticed more this year, they're trying to align themselves a little more with the Common Core. So that's important for them, and they need to do that to stay relevant as a company. One of the other most important things that it would be great to explain to a parent is that it can help you with goal setting. Not only personal goal setting for your classroom, but for the students as well. So Just out of curiosity, what might be some, do you remember doing any goal setting with students separate from MAP testing? Maybe something while you were conferring with the student?
I mean, typically I'll ask students how many books they read in 6th grade, and we'll set a number goal.
Okay.
We'll talk about genre a little bit, and if you see an area of deficit on the map with the literary strand data, it
Sure.
could be that they just haven't had enough exposure to multiple genres.
Sure. For an example, I was going to say, what if a student was having difficulty understanding literary text structure? What might be a goal that, you might set for that if they're having a hard time with the literary text structure?
I mean, making certain that they understand the characteristics of each genre, so when they encounter a genre that's less familiar, they realize that, if they're anticipating reading a fairy tale, that they can expect these characteristics. Whereas if they're going to read realistic fiction, they might need to approach it with a different lens.
Right, that's perfect. So, I mean, the background's there. It's just really a matter that sometimes when we're on the spot with the parent and they want to know, or at our curriculum night when you're explaining this in front of the whole classroom, somebody might pull you to the side at the end and say, well, last year my child got A's and B's and they were still recommended for summer school. And that's an important part, and that's where it kind of could get touchy, but that's again why it's most important that we're able to understand ourselves the breakdown of the MAP test and then further explain it, what goes into it to the parent as well. Because we, in our classroom, we always say we want the students to be successful. The MAP test gives us a different, it's a snapshot. And we also do it more than once, so it's not like we're just going on that one test. So, reviewing areas that are assessed in MAPs, we mentioned vocabulary, word knowledge, informational, text comprehension and structure, literary text comprehension and structure. For an example, students may be asked to determine, this is important too, because a parent might say, what kind of questions are on the MAP test? So, a student may, have to determine a character's motivation after reading a brief passage. They may have to define a vocabulary word or a piece of figurative language. So these are some of the more specific, things within these areas of the MAP test that we may have to break down a little bit further. Point of view are things that are covered on the MAP test. And in the binder and also on the website. And what we could do, when we meet again, what we could do is we'll go on the website together and look at some of the further, strategies that they kind of laid out, where a student should be at this level, or to score, say, that 217 we said a student should have in the fall, what should they be able to do? So it has a lot of the objectives, and like I said before, they're probably going to further align that with Common Core. But also, the most important thing is to explain to the parents that all these skills are important as they go through their academic career and are getting prepared for the more complex texts that they're going to encounter in high school and even in college. And that's what the Common Core is all about, the readiness standards. So as a teacher, you'll be able to explain this to the parents, but also how it benefits you, but how it benefits the child as well. So looking at some of the questions we brainstormed earlier from the parents' perspective, I don't know if we need a role play or try to answer, but your question was a very good one. But let's say it is a question like a parent asks you, we're going to do Saturday school placement for some students that need support in November, and a parent might just come ask you, call you up and say, how is it determined that my child was recommended for Saturday school? Do you think you have a little bit of a better gist of what you might be able to say to the parent?
I do. I think helping them to understand what our goals are for each student, and not only to score at grade level, but to also be seeing progress, and that's something that we monitor throughout, I think is important, and that we use a variety of tools to help make those decisions, not only MAP testing, but class data, but that it is a valid tool, and that the company is, does have a goal for the students to be successful as well in the areas of reading language arts that will help them in the other content areas.
Yeah, absolutely. An example, and that's a great point you brought up, that it's a valid assessment, and even though that might need to be explained a little bit to the parents, but by getting this huge pool of students throughout the country that are taking it, it gives a much better picture, as opposed to if it only was our school, it would just happen to be not as valid or you know, as an assessment. And you might even add something even specific within the strands. Let's say it's the decoding of vocabulary that the child's having an issue with. You might talk about how that's going to be addressed in Saturday school to help the student have some strategies when they're encountering difficult vocabulary, like you mentioned, in the content areas. So in a couple of weeks, we'll be having a curriculum open house. This would be a great opportunity for you to give a little bit of an overview of the MAP test because it's early in the year. It's always better to be proactive before you're getting those questions in November on Saturday school. Liken it, I'm going to give you a good analogy. Liken it to a child's height. A lot of the parents, when their kids were young, you know, put them against the wall, make a marking with a pencil, and watch their student grow. And that's the nice thing about having this in our district from the elementary schools through the middle school, is that that's what it's like. It's like measuring the child's height. It's our little markings on the wall where we see how the student grows. And you brought a great, you know, especially academic growth in reading. And you brought a great point up that it's not the only tool we use to drive instruction, but it is very helpful in helping us drive instruction and helping students set goals, which is something I think as a district we're going to do a lot more. And as we're building this bridge with families throughout the course of this year, it'll be very important that we can involve the parents with the goal setting as well. I don't know, do you have any other questions? Or maybe what we could do is meet next time and go on the website and take a look at some of the tools that NWA and MAP offer for us.
Yeah, that'd be a great idea. I'd love to learn how to use those better.
All right, good. I look forward to meeting with you again on this.
Thanks, Ben.
You're welcome.